Welcome to the Artistry Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things culture, art, creativity, entertainment, whatever strikes our little fancy. My name's Sev.
And I'm Jay.
Today we're going to talk about inspiration and what has inspired us in our lives to, do stuff. As usual, you'll find detailed information in the description down below if you're watching on YouTube and on the episode description on Spotify.
And today we'll change our usual approach and speak on how we've been inspired by specific things that we've come across in our lives. This is a more casual episode where we will likely just debate about movies, series, books, whatever else we find cool or interesting. Let us know whether you like this looser format in the comments.
Yeah, we've been kind of guilty of going on multiple tangents or just trying to preach too much. So today's episode is more about, just being more chill, more relaxed. It's just an excuse for us to talk about whatever the goddamn hell we feel like.
Yeah, hope you find that fair. So just to start this off, let's just share a little bit of what we are watching, listening, or reading to. Seth, if you don't mind, what is it that you'll find interesting lately?
I'll start with what I've been watching. Have you seen the series Why Women Kill on HBO?
I've never even heard about it.
Yeah, it seemed like another take on like Desperate Housewives of women doing sneaky stuff just to go around a unfaithful husband or whatever. And I started watching with my girlfriend and I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep watching. To show you the premise of Why Women Kill, it's a TV series on HBO where it gives you 3 stories in 3 different timelines. You have the 1950s, you have the 1970s, and you have the more recent 2017. And all 3 stories depict a married couple, going through a turbulent time. And the whole premise of the series is, as the episodes go on, you start to see the reasons why women might kill. And it's always related to, infidelity is always related to jealousy or just, shenanigans of the sorts. And at the first episodes, I remember watching, I was like, this is kind of too soap opera. But gosh darn it, by the end, it hooked me in.
Sure, and sorry, I just got lost. Go on from here.
I was being too captivating.
No, it felt a little bit abrupt at the end there. Sure, I'll just say, I guess in the previous episodes I mentioned I was watching The 100. I did finish it.
Oh, nice.
So this was, man, you were so good, and you even said what platform the show is on. I don't even know where The 100 was on. It was like CW or something. And it's finished. It's been a while that it's finished. And I actually would be very curious to know what you think about it from a plot point of view, because I feel the overall, the long-term storytelling is really interesting. It's quite good, and it doesn't feel too improvised, last-minute writing or anything. It doesn't feel too much like that. But on the other hand, there are some just points, and you're like, what the hell just happened? Why did this thing just happen? This made no sense. And then I was curious, so I actually searched it up, and in some interviews, the writer mentions, just when you were making a TV show, unfortunately, there are things that happen that are beyond your writing, and you have to make adaptations. An actor has to do something else, or an actor had to go to another TV show,
or
and you have to make an adaptation.
Yeah, sometimes the book just has too much content.
Yeah, and so, some things just don't make much sense, and they feel a bit abrupt, and, kind of changed. It feels like the story was changed on the fly, and I think that did happen in a way. And at the end, the ending was... It was an ending. It was, because some things, but some stories you're just there, and it feels like, but this wasn't ending.
The part of the reason why I I was speaking about Why Women Kill and why I suddenly stopped is because I realized that the best parts of that series was the ending. Like the way the stories, they wrote 3 stories and it culminated to an ending that was actually pretty intriguing. Like throughout, at the beginning, I remember, I told you it was 3 different timelines. And I remember the first timeline was like, this is kind of boring. And the second timeline was a bit, that wasn't my interest. That wasn't the sort of entertainment that I wanted to consume. And the third timeline had more interesting things. But by the end of it, the third timeline was the weakest one, and all of them culminated into a really spectacular ending. But I didn't want to go into it. So it was hard to evaluate. So I guess my question to you about the 100 is, from 0 to 10, how would you rank the ending?
Oh, the ending? I'd rate it about 6.5.
All right, so slightly
conservative. Yeah, a little, but a little conservative. I mean, I just felt it was a little bit out of context considering the overall storyline. Well, it's hard to speak about it without doing any spoilers, right? Yeah, but it felt a little bit odd. I mean, it kind of makes sense, but it was a bit odd. And
I have another question.
I mean, before you ask the question, I just want to say that despite that, I still think the show is one of the better shows I watched. Recently. I mean, it was different in the way the story was told, at least from what I've watched. Maybe I just don't watch shows like that usually, but I definitely enjoyed the journey. And it starts off a bit slow in the beginning of the first season, but I feel the way the story evolves, and I think the characters actually do have changes over time, and I think that is one of the more interesting things about stories, and which we spoke about briefly on our last podcast about characters. And I think in that regard, it's generally interesting, although there are still some characters that merely exist to move the plot in a certain direction, right? But the characters that do change, I think it is in a very interesting way.
So my question, I think you kind of answered it on that explanation, is you feel like the series is more about the journey, not the destination. Many people make it like when you're watching a series, the ending needs to stick, right? It needs to land. If you reach a very fulfilling journey and by the end it's lost and they've been dead all along, it really taints the whole experience, the whole journey. So what it feels like is the ending didn't ruin it for you. It was just an ending, but the journey along the friends you made along the way, it's the true value of that series.
I mean, yes, is what I can say. Exactly right. That's my experience.
No, keep on.
Yeah, I mean, I feel, for example, comparing to, for example, Game of Thrones, you could say the journey was worth it, but the ending kind of ruined it. Yeah. In this case, I don't feel it ruined it. It was just a little bit odd, but it was within the I won't say the logic, but it made sense in a way. Yeah. Like whereas in the other case it just didn't, or it was
We are starting to become a Game of Thrones hate podcast.
Oh crap! Sorry, it was just such a good show, and
I know, so disappointing.
And I watch so few shows. Like, I don't actually watch a lot of shows. I just get bored midway, and there are a few shows that actually go all the way to the end. And so that was a really good one. And I would still say Game of Thrones is still worth watching.
Oh, yeah. Just the first 4 or 5 seasons, so they're pretty legit. Then when it starts getting sour, you feel it in your heart. Like, this isn't who I loved. He's changed.
God. Oh jeez, that feels so. Yeah,
but yeah. By the way, the 100 is on Netflix in case people want to see it. And how many episodes is that shit? How many series episodes?
Oh, good question. It's 100.
Oh, makes sense.
You gotta appreciate.
Oh, that's way too many. Yeah, I mean I appreciate it the same way. Like, you remember 24 from way back when?
I didn't watch it, but I know of it. Yeah.
The whole thing was back then. Series had 24 episodes, and they made a series 24 where each episode was a specific hour of a day, and that seemed like such a cool concept until you realized it was super impractical. It's like more effort than it was worth. It's just a gimmick.
I mean, marketing.
Going back to Why Women Kill, the ending is pretty much. It is an impressive feature, like the way the stories just mingle into fulfilling ending. Like it's also an anthology series. Like the first season, they have 2 seasons, and the first one, the characters don't cross over to the second season. It's a whole new cast by the second season, and I've realized I kind of like that shit. I kind of dig it. I've been watching kind of like Black Mirror, which oddly enough, I'm not a big fan of Black Mirror. For my own personal reasons, I know that Black Mirror is a great series, but these series like kind of like, okay, we told a story, scrap it off. It's all we wanted to say, and now let's start something new. That goes into kind of like what me and Eli were discussing on the last episode. Like, it's got to be so rare for an author to just create a series and say, no, this is just a 1-season show. We don't have to sell it for 3 seasons. We don't have to pay these actors for the next 20 years and royalties or whatever. It's just 1 season and we're done. And the way the show keeps being relevant is by changing cast constantly. Another example of that was The Haunting of Bly Manor, which, did you see it? It was also on Netflix. It was this kind of horror series, I don't know, tense drama, thriller, whatever. And they have 2 seasons as well. And it's about ghost stories in a haunted house. And the first season, they had a whole different, well, they didn't have a different cast, but they had different characters. Like, they reused a lot of the same actors, but in different roles. And they told 2 distinct stories that were really cool. And man, I'd actually like to see series do that more often, kind of like a short story format. That's pretty cool.
I mean, when you mentioned the way that Why Women Kill is set up, it reminds me of True Detective. Not sure if you watched
that is another great example. Yeah, True Detective, perfect. Each season is also, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, actually, I only watched the first 2. I mean, the first was really good, and then the second, I mean, it's a different story. The second was just decent, and then I didn't ever watch the third. Maybe I should.
The third one you should, because that's the True Detective, I think, is a prime example of why these series can be dangerous if you do an anthology, which is the first season is so good in True Detective that whatever follows up will kind of pale in comparison. Like, I don't think the second season is bad. It's just not as interesting, or doesn't have as captivating actors as Woody Harrelson and the other dude who's super famous and whose name I don't know.
McConaughey.
Yeah. And
did you just do that on purpose?
Yeah. And the third season is also it's really good. It has Marshall Ali, which is an actor I absolutely adore. And I think it ends in a high note. If it even ends, I don't know if they're going to make a 4th season. I'm not sure.
Well, the internet is telling me that the show is finished, at least. That's what it looks like. I don't know if it is, but yeah, it looks like it's done.
But I would wish to see more series like that.
But actually, that's interesting. I'll definitely check out Why Women Kill. I mean, who knows?
I don't know if
some
I
of those
it.
Oh, really?
Like,
you just that's a very
because it's a very. It's not because of the quality of the product. I think it's a good quality. It's about the topic. Sometimes people don't like fantasy, so it's really hard to recommend them Lord of the Rings, even if it's an amazing movie. I don't know if it is your style, if it is your type of entertainment. It's pretty much like suburban married couples being very, I don't know, in shenanigans. And some people might find that a bit, I don't know, not interesting enough. Like, they need more drama or more intrigue or more mystery. And that is, the show seems a bit too suburban housewives.
I see. Well, sure.
But it's good. Case, if that
but
sounds,
at least I'll... Mm-hmm.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, if you like Desperate Housewives or Sex in the City or that sort of gossipy show, check out Why Women Kill. It's pretty goddamn good.
Sure, very well. We'll do that. We'll take a look, see what we think. Moving on a little bit from shows, then perhaps we would speak about things that actually inspired us to do something, to take some action, and not just just things that, this is kind of cool and shiny and interesting, or things that change the way you think, perhaps, and not inspire you to do action. Is there any such thing that you had moving along that you'd like to share?
Things that inspired me. There's way too many. I will, as a writer or as a illustrator, whatever, sometimes I go in these lulls, long periods of time where I don't feel like doing anything. But suddenly there's a piece of art or a piece like a series, a book or whatever that I find so cool that I immediately feel like I gotta do something in this world, in this vein. Like if I'm reading a book and the book really captivates me, I'm like, okay, I gotta go right now because that author inspired me to write. And an example of that was some time ago, I was reading the Witcher novel, the Witcher series. Like, I've heard that the author of the Witcher series, which is a Polish guy by the name of Andrzej Sapkowski, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, probably I'm not. I'm sorry, Mr. Sapkowski, if you're listening. But I've come to the realization that many people don't like his book, and he's a very polarizing author. Because if you're not aware, the Witcher series launched the hugely successful game franchise with the same name, The Witcher game. And that was so incredibly popular for nerds that it was only a matter of time until the Witcher series was adapted into a TV series with Superman's very own Henry Cavill taking the lead role. And I think Sapkowski hates that. I think he dislikes the series. I think he dislikes the game, and he's this sort of bitter old man that says, "Oh, it's thanks to my fame that book that series, fucking hell, it's thanks to my fame that game got successful. The game went on my pigtails to success." And truth is, I kind of feel like it's the opposite. Not many people knew about The Witcher if it wasn't for the guys, the developers of CD Projekt Red that created that adapted The Witcher. So Sapkowski had this very enigmatic, conflictuous background, and even like maybe because out of contempt, people said that his books aren't that good, that he doesn't write that well, that he's a bit muddled in terms of his descriptions, and he kind of just skips around to what he fancies. And I gotta see what this is. And my brother actually offered me the book for Christmas, and I started reading it, and I gotta admit, the criticisms they give Sapkowski, I totally understand it. The dude has weird ways of describing things. Like, on the first page, he says, in an erotic sense, he describes a woman bare-breasted. She was naked from the top up, and she just seductively grinded her nipple on the eyelid of a man. And that is such a weird-ass description for me. Like, that doesn't sound erotic. It seems like weird contortionist body play. I don't know, man. I don't consider rubbing nipples on eyelids as being particularly sexy. And that is like the first page of the book. And I don't know. I was kind of intrigued by the way he approaches things. Like, writers generally, especially in fantasy, they have to build up the tension. And in this book, the author was starting to introduce the main character, the Witcher. And through the games, I knew that the Witcher was this kind of hero, this dark horse hero, the lone wolf with a heart of gold, the man who has a noble, he has a code, but he's kind of ruthless at the same time, and he doesn't take shit from no one. That's how I know Geralt from the books, and I was curious to see how he was introduced in this book. And
that's how you knew it's from the games.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I felt like I had switched it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the book kind of starts out in this tavern scene where Geralt, the Witcher, just walks in and he just wants like a room or whatever, or just a drink. And the tavern keeper, actually the Witcher wanted information. He just walked in and he wanted to speak to the tavern keeper saying, "I want to go see this man. Where is he?" And the tavern keeper was giving him a hard time. "Listen, we don't serve your kind here. You're not welcome. We don't like mutants." And as I was reading this, that's kind of cool. They just immediately blurred out the distrust in mutants, that Geralt is different. He's a pariah. Okay, I see. And as the scene goes along, you see these thugs that were in the bar get up and they approach the tavern keeper, who is their friend. "Is this guy giving you trouble? Can't you listen, mutant? You're not welcome here. Get the fuck out of this." And they start insulting him and calling him a whore son, and just really pushing him to fight. And Geralt is this stoic figure. He barely reacts, is being very polite, and You see in this tense moment that he is kind of jaded from it, or that he's confident in his abilities. He doesn't let himself be pushed back, but he doesn't provoke either. That was kind of interesting. But the dudes just kept pushing him, and suddenly they draw swords, and the scene ends. And that shit, and that is such a weird thing for a writer. That then you would want to see the character, how he handles in these fights, but you never do. Then as soon as the scene ends, fade to black, start again, and you see the mayor of the city speaking to Geralt. So you really did kill those guys back in the tavern. That's not cool, bro.
It's interesting, as you said that. I don't know if you watched the show, and I don't remember accurately, but I believe that scene is in the TV show. And it sounds, perhaps it was in the beginning. It sounds very familiar. I don't know if it cut back to black or anything. Just
no, you saw the fight. The show also starts out with him, and it's also, by the way, not the same fight. Like the fight that happens in the show, it starts the same way because it's kind of a homage to the book, I believe. Like Garrett walking into a tavern and people mistrusting him, and fighting ensues. But the book, it starts at a different time. However, yeah, in the show they at least show the action. They show Geralt being a badass, if not just because it's visually more interesting. Like obviously a TV series is more visual than a book. But yeah, on the book, they just skip to the mayor speaking to Geralt, and then the conversation is why I felt inspired. Because if there's one thing Sapkowski does well, is dialogue, I think. Like all the characters feel very unique. The conversation, first of all, he also does huge exposition dumps during conversation, which is not good. Like, and
you sound very contradictory today.
I know.
I love he's so good at dialogue, but then he's so shit at it at the same time.
Because as you can see, he doesn't do description. He doesn't do, I don't know, he doesn't build the scene. He doesn't build the tension. He just says, okay, I'm tired of this. I want to go to the next scene. But because he needs to give exposition, he does that in terms of dialogue dumps. So that's the bad part of his dialogue. Like in that scene where he's talking with them, where Geralt is talking with the mayor was like, yes, Geralt, you are kind of witchers that go around doing contracts. I too could use a contract because I'm indeed. I don't need you to kill a monster, not yet, but maybe one day, because my king is kind of monstrous. He's not actually a monster, but he is monstrous in personality, and that's what you, Geralt, will do. And that conversation is very forced. And he starts to basically give exposition. So once upon a time, my king had an incestuous relationship with his wife, and they, with his sister, who would then become his wife, the queen. And they had a daughter who was a product of incest. And that daughter became a monster, and she died, and the wife died, and everyone died. But the king, he truly loved that daughter, and he couldn't bear to get her killed. So the thing is that daughter is a monster, and she's killing people, and we the people don't like getting killed so much. So Witcher, the thing is, we're hiring you behind our king's wishes to kill the daughter, and you can't tell the king that you're doing this. You have to tell him that you're curing her from her monstrosity, so that she can be a girl again. And that is the introduction. So as you can see, there is an interesting premise there. There is intrigue there. You just have to go through that exposition dump at the beginning. And because of that exposition dump, from that moment on, the dialogues are super interesting. Because Sapkowski created these factions. You have the faction that want the monster killed because it's killing people. You have the faction of the king who wants the monster saved because it's his daughter. And you know, despite her monstrous ability, he truly believes that she can be changed. But he's also described as this mad king who doesn't care about people, who has this fickle temperament and is very quick to send people to the death, to the gallows. And then the mayor looks at Geralt and says, "Dude, you have to be quiet, right? This conversation between us never happened, right? Because otherwise we both die. We're trusting you to do the right thing. And I think I am looking at your character. I think I know what you're going to choose." And the next scene, again, basically cut to black, curtains unveil, and he's speaking with the king already. He teleported there. And the next scene...
Go on, finish. I just want to just so you would make clear which part of this dialogue or whatever inspires you. What, because I didn't follow.
Well, it's the tension. It's I like dialogue is so hard to make, and when you see voices so clearly defined, when you see like what I wanted to say now, kind of this exemplifies that better. Now you know that Geralt is in this kind of dilemma, and he's speaking with a king who is fickle, and their conversation is so earnest and honest. Where the king just speaks to, Geralt, Mr. Witcher, I see you are here about this monster problem we've been having in our city. I assume you've been hearing a lot of contracts of this sort. And the Witcher has this double role where he wants to speak with the king to say that, because he's an honest man, that he wants to kill the monster. And he wants to tell the king that he's sick. But he's not going to do it outright, so he's being very respectful and saying, you see, this monster's been creating problems to these villagers. And many people think that it cannot be cured. It's just this horrible situation where either the monster dies or this kingdom dies. And the king listens to this, and he's very blunt and very honest and very honest, but at the same time, it feels like it's a test. Like there's so much intrigue and there's so much juice in this dialogue where they're saying things, but they're not saying what they're meaning. And by the end, Geralt is basically telling the king through other words that I will do my best to save and to cure the girl, but if push comes to shove, I'm going to kill her, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. And the king listens to this, and in a moment where he feels like he's going to kill Geralt or he's going to throw him away, he just leaves the room, I think. And that is, there is so much depth in that. And that is what inspired me, the depth of dialogue. Not just saying, I'm the hero and I'm going to do this. Having characters be so fleshed out and so with their own agendas and their own motivations and their own missions, that each dialogue feels like it's a puzzle. And I really enjoy that. And I became fascinated with writing a whole chapter which is just dialogue.
So just to see if I understood well, from what I heard, I mean, this is my interpretation, is that the beauty of that dialogue, or of the dialogue that this Mr. I forgot his surname, writes.
Sapkowski.
Sapkowski, yeah. Mr. Cow. Let's call him Mr. Cow.
Oh, I'm sure he liked that.
Dude, if he listens to this podcast and he hates us, our
Fine.
job is done.
Yeah,
that's good enough.
It's just another thing.
Yeah, but somewhat from what I heard is that the interesting or the beautiful part of the dialogue is that there are two sides to it, or is what is being told and what isn't. And
exactly.
Although it's not obvious, it is quite, I guess, intuitive to infer what isn't being told. So it kind of, if you compare it to visual, it's kind of using negative space.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think
it does that a lot throughout the book. Like this thing with the king and Geralt was the first example. But even Geralt sometimes kind of like omits the truth, and there's a lot of scenes in this book where he's speaking to a monster or a villain and someone who's obviously monstrous. But the way that the villain presents itself kind of seems like that there's a reason to their evilness. And Geralt isn't just there to just kill them; he wants to understand them. But it's such a tense scene where a bull-shaped man is threatening to eat Geralt. But Geralt's like, all right, then do it. Go ahead. And the bull guy just gets confused and, I don't want to. People just usually go away. And I don't know. There's so much in play in all the scenes. He makes characters very complex. But I also think that is because, and why people don't like Sapkowski, is that he gives these huge exposition dumps before. Like, you need to do your homework before you get the juicy bits. And that probably is what I learned from him, is how to hide exposition better, how to not do that mistake. Because like you said, the negative space of a conversation, like what is not being said, is as interesting, if not more, than what is being said. And that is something really, really powerful in dialogue.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that from his flaw you learn to do something, the flaw that you see in it, and you wanted to avoid it. It's very interesting that it affected you in that way. I mean personally, thinking about things that kind of inspired me, although I don't think I took much action because of it, but in a way it kind of not just be in a certain direction. Is I do like games, computer games, and I think there's only one studio whose games I felt there was any emotional involvement, emotional investment. I think is a better way to put it on my part, and that would be the Supergiant Game Studios. And I think they have like 4 games so far. And I played their first game, which was the Bastion, which very briefly, it's just a story about a kid who's kind of. I think that's a very common way to start stories. It's just your character has amnesia or whatever, so you don't know anything about the character, and it's just a way to start the story. But I think it's done in a very interesting way, and he's in this world which has been destroyed, but it's being rebuilt as he travels through it. And visually it's interesting, and story-wise, I enjoy stories where there is some narrative, and the way the game is played is there is a narrative, there is a voice.
The narrator is very good.
Yeah, there is a voice of the narrator, and it's fun because he comes in when you do certain things. So if you interact with certain aspects of the game, the voice comes in and would do a small comment beyond the progression of the story. Just you just hit a wall or and you smash it, and he's your hammer is so strong, and or not yours.
I remember
the boys.
That game briefly. There was a part like you can destroy. There's a part where there's like a huge amount of vases, and you can just go around destroying vases, and the guy just goes, "The boy really enjoyed destroying all those vases."
Yeah, and don't you love it? That's for me. It's something I haven't seen in other games explored. So I found it very interesting, and it's I just found it innovative. But the game itself, the way the story is told, it's a little bit strange because the character doesn't have. The character is blank. I think it just comes back to me from what you spoke about Harry Potter. It's kind of a bland character, and the main character in the story, which is it's the same way. It's just pretty much blank, and the story is what's around it, and not the main character itself, which you control. But the story moves through this way with the narrative, and by the end of the story, I think that was the first time I cried over a game. Like the way that it ended, I had such emotional investment in the story that it actually made me cry, and I never experienced that with a game. And I tried their other game, which is also it picks up in a similar way the story is told. There's also a narrator, but it goes off in a little bit of a different direction. The gameplay itself, Transistor, exactly. You already know it, and I don't feel it had as big of an emotional impact, but I still felt invested there, and I found myself fascinated with how they can do it, because I didn't experience it with other games, that you can tell a story and not just have a game to play, and I feel they're very good at telling stories through the medium of a game.
Like being a video game, there is an element, because I played both those games, and the element of gameplay, the loops that you go through to progress in the story, and I did enjoy the beauty, the artistry behind Bastion. Yeah, the Bastion it's a very beautiful. Actually, Supergiant games, all their games are absolutely gorgeous. They have really good design, very simplistic. Design in their HUDs and their menus, and the art is very vivid, very vibrant, and obviously the narrator and the music is top quality. Like everything that has an artistic appeal, the game excels. But the gameplay seems rather bland to me, and that is why I had a hard time finishing Bastion and a harder time still finishing Transistor. How did you feel about that?
It's interesting you mentioned that. I don't know what kind of player you are. I mean, for example, I'm not quite a completionist. So if you take example of Bastion, they have a lot of features for replayability, right? Like if you finish the game, you can do this or that, and then you can increase difficulty, and you can change the difficulty. I don't really care about that. I play the game for the story mainly. So I would go through the things that, I would go through the aspects of the game that tell the story, and I didn't much care about exploring every single weapon, for example, in Bastion, as you can choose and combine different weapons you use. I didn't really care about that. I just picked what worked for me and maybe changed it here and there. But other than that, for me, it was all about the story. It wasn't the gameplay was kind of a means to an end for me, and it was enjoyable. I didn't find it a burden. And regarding Transistor, yeah, I don't think I found it a burden either. Again, they have a lot of different combinations to explore. I just picked a few that I felt worked, changed it a few times just out of curiosity, but it didn't make me linger. I was there for the story. That was the main goal. And I think the way it's done is beautifully. I mean, it's very hard. I mean, if you speak about game design, there is one very difficult aspect is ideally what you want is you want to get the player in the flow, as they say. You want the difficulty to match the skill level of the player. And it's very difficult to do because you have different levels of people. You just can't do it for the broad audience. It's very difficult. But for me, I felt the difficulty was good enough for my skill level. I mean, in Bastion, I remember you can adjust it to a certain extent. So, like, if you fail, you just go back and like you adjust it. In Transistor, I don't remember having any adjustments for difficulty. I mean, I don't want to go too into it with so I don't spoil the experience because I feel like part of the experience is the unknown and discovery, and I love that. And I think they do this very well. Transistor, perhaps a little better so than Bastion in terms of gameplay experience, discovering certain aspects, mechanics of the game. Oh man, it's beautiful. So I won't go too deep into it, but like when you fight bosses, there are things that happen that you don't expect, and it's beautiful. But you still, at least for me, I was still able to finish it. I can imagine maybe some players wouldn't be able to, but dude, I thought it was design-wise, mwah. Like it was just I can't think of any better game that has done this, or any game that has done this better. At least for my skill level. So
what
I
did
enjoyed
it
it very
motivate
much.
you to do then? You said game motivated you. What did it propel you to do?
Right. So it didn't get me to do any actionable thing, but it drove me further down the path of I'd like to create more stuff. So I don't think I'm quite ready to like do games and anything, but I would like to, for example, make short movies, tell stories. So perhaps it kind of pushes me in the direction of I would like to tell stories, and I think the way they do it is very interesting. I don't think I'm particularly good at it, but I'd like to be involved in that aspect. And I believe maybe I don't know if I mentioned this to you or generally in the podcast, but yeah, like I'd like to tell short, small stories, participate in some way in that, be a part of it. But I don't think, I mean, I never tried, but I don't think I'm like a writer or anything. I never tried to do proper writing, but I'd like to tell stories through some visual mediums or other types of mediums. I mean, I also taught English, and when you're in the classroom teaching, depending on the topics, depending what you're teaching, there is an aspect of guiding the room and telling them a story, and I kind of enjoyed that. So I think that kind of transfers a bit
For sure.
into these visual and storytelling aspects.
Going back, like the way you talked about Bastion immediately reminded me of two games that I do enjoy a lot. And in the theme of me being contradictory, these two games are in different spectrums of why I enjoy them. And in terms of gameplay, of pure gameplay, I do enjoy a game that keeps challenging me and whose the journey of playing it is a puzzle that I must unlock. And to me, that is the Dark Souls games, the Bloodborne games. I enjoy the brutal difficulty, and it's people say it's brutally difficult. It's not. It's an unforgiving game, but it's not difficult. I could go for hours playing those games without getting a single death. But it is a game where you need to be okay with failing and dying and starting not starting over from scratch, but losing a lot of your progression. It's a very unforgiving game. But the fights seem like little puzzles, like the enemies, the way you move around them, the weapons you choose. And the same thing you talked about the boss fights. Like each boss fight in the Dark Souls games, always feels like it seems so terrifying at first. But you keep hitting against the wall and you keep learning new tricks. And the monster doesn't do this. I can go here and I can hit him on the ass, which is the one solution to all monsters, unfortunately. Is you can dodge and hit him on the ass, or they're going to use a super power up, so you have to back away. You can use a certain shield to block this. This weapon does more damage. And this whole process is so enticing to me. Being able, and when you finally defeat a boss that has been giving you trouble for days, you feel this invigoration of relief mixed with sensation of reward and release of endorphins. Or like, finally, I did it. I'm the best. I am a god at video games. And then you proceed to the next boss where you immediately get your shit pushed in. That, I really enjoy that. And Dark Souls, even though people say it has an amazing story and whatever, it has the worst way of storytelling. The storytelling of Dark Souls is you need to read through a Wikipedia page constantly. And sorry, that's not storytelling. That's the game has a really god awful way of showing you the world. They say that, oh, it's visual storytelling. This world feels lived in. Yeah, motherfucker. I need to read Wikipedia pages so that I understand what it's showing me. Otherwise, I'm just seeing a castle that is decrepit. I don't know what the significance behind the castle. And now on the opposite spectrum of that, there is a game that I absolutely love, and I think you would adore it too. So this is my recommendation to you, Jay, which is Outer Wilds. And absolutely,
again?
Sorry?
Can it come again? I didn't catch the name of the game.
Outer Wilds.
Outer Wilds.
Not to be confused with Outer Worlds, a game that came out almost at the same time. Outer Worlds is from the same guys that created Fallout, New Vegas, and it's kind of Fallout-esque. It's an RPG where there's a lot of conversation. The combat is kind of finicky, and it's based on this, not post-apocalyptic, but this weird society in the future. I don't really like Outer Worlds. Outer Wilds is a game where it's a charming game where you're given a spaceship and you're exploring the universe, and you can go to different planets, and the planets are all the size of marbles almost. They're so small, but they're so jam-packed full of stuff that you can obviously explore. And the beauty of the game is that every 23 minutes or something, I think it's every 23 minutes, the sun explodes and you start over from scratch without nothing. And the mystery of the game becomes, why is the sun exploding and can you stop it? I say that you lose everything, but you don't lose your knowledge. The way Outer Wilds works is that you're going through the game looking for more knowledge. Like you see these dialogues where scientists from a bygone era were experimenting with the sun to see if they could harness time traveling. And you start to think, time traveling, that's kind of like what I'm doing. And the sun is exploding. Is this connected? And you explore the universe, pissing out a story that by the end, I almost cried. And it's absolute. And what is absolutely astonishing about that game is that there are no new mechanics. There's no skills you unlock. Everything you need to finish the game, you have. Literally, I could pick up the game right now, start from scratch, and finish it in 5 minutes. And
it's about storytelling.
It's completely about the storytelling, and it's about the journey in itself. Like, you don't know how to finish the game, so obviously you have to go planet to planet, unlock the puzzles, learn tricks and mechanics that the game didn't teach you. You had to learn it in these trials, and suddenly you gain a love for this universe, for the characters, and especially for the things you're reading. I didn't described it well enough. The things you're reading is from a civilization in the past that was killed mysteriously. Like I think millions of years in the past, they had the civilization that suddenly just disappeared, just died out. And you're going in through the universe, finding relics of this ancient civilization, and you're trying to piece out why they disappeared. And at the same time, you're in your current era, you're looking for a lost astronaut. And all these things kind of merge together into an absolutely gorgeous story. The soundtrack is absolutely amazing. The visuals, because it's an indie game, they're cute, but obviously they're getting dated. But I'd still recommend anyone in the goddamn world to play Outer Wilds. It's an absolutely amazing storytelling experience with fun gameplay. So I think it scratches your itch, Jay.
I put it. I made a note. I put it on my wish list.
You have to play it. Also, because it's a game that doesn't invest a lot of your time. You could play for 22 minutes. Every 22 minutes, the sun explodes and you start over. And with that, you can just stop and go like, "Oh, that was interesting," and put down the game.
It sounds a bit like a roguelike, yeah, when you kind of
It's not a
you go through
roguelike
stuff.
because actually it's the opposite of a roguelike because a roguelike changes constantly. That game is on rails. Everything, like each time the world resets, it resets exactly as it was. Nothing changes. So you're always going through the same path, but you're discovering. Like, actually, that's not true. You're not going through the same path. You're always in the same universe, but you're going through different paths. In 22 minutes, you might spend those 22 minutes going to a planet and discovering this that's surrounded by hurricanes. But one of the hurricanes, instead of pushing you out, pushes you in. If you discover that hurricane, you might get pushed in deep into the Earth's core, and you find this secret temple, let's say, that teaches you things that you didn't know. And then 22 minutes are gone, and you start over from scratch. But instead of going to that planet, you go to the moon, and in the moon you discover other things. So basically, it's 22 minutes where you have to constantly get as much information as you can, and as you keep learning, you find the path you're supposed to take. And that is, I found it so magical, such a magical experience.
I mean, it sounds like an interesting concept. There is a board game, I believe it's called Time Stories, and I think it's I never finished it because, well, you need to play with other people, and I wasn't able to get the group to finish. But basically, they have different episodes, if that makes sense, where it's a different setting, and you start there, and it's related to time travel as well, and you have a time limit to go through the world and figure out the puzzle, just like in this game. And then when your time is up, you reset and you go back at the beginning. But just as you mentioned, you discovered things and the story, you know the story. So I don't remember if there is anything in the game that marks that, but you personally you remember things, right, that you didn't know, like, oh, I already spoke to this character, I know what he's about, I know what he's going to say. And I think it's a very interesting also concept for a board game, and it sounds very similar to what you're describing. I really wish I could finish that game. I mean, I'm kind of sad because of COVID and stuff that cannot play games with people in real life rather than just online. But yeah, it's an interesting concept that, the loop, the time loop, and the story is the goal.
You spoke of me of this game, and I immediately want to buy it because that sounds completely up my alley.
Sure, dude. Let's plan a trip for when the COVID is over. I want to play that game after you buy it.
After I buy it, fair enough. I thought
I'm not gonna buy. Dude, no. This was I played it in a board game coffee shop in Japan, and well, then the people were kind of come and go. It's hard to keep the same group. So I think we played for about 2 hours. We didn't finish it, or we didn't finish our session even. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyway,
2 hours
you have to,
session. Jesus.
No, because you reset the game and you go back, but I don't think we even finished one complete time. What do you quota? Is that, I don't know what word to use. So you have a certain time to explore the world, and we didn't finish that in our session, and then we never got back together because just several people. Anyway, it didn't work. And dude, I've been wanting to buy games all the time. I just stopped myself because I just can't get people to play them with. I have 2 board games in my house, and I didn't buy any more because I don't want to. I only have 2 board games. I started a campaign. I'm playing Gloomhaven. I have Jaws of the Lion because I didn't want to buy the whole game because I wasn't sure I could get the people. And I had, I think, 4 sessions. That is, the tutorial is 5 sessions. I had 4 sessions, and COVID restrictions hit harder, and we stopped meeting, and we were never able to get the momentum back on track. And one of them was actually Eli, who was on our podcast last time. And he was one of the people who couldn't make it to do it because, family and stuff, because he was worried. I think his mother works in the hospital or something, there's a high risk, whatever. Anyway, that kind of stuff. But moving on from games and stuff, I just want to mention briefly about, also related to storytelling, but I think we're kind of finishing up our quota for today's episode. Just a little bit about, I think you know him. He doesn't need any introduction. Hayao Miyazaki. He's a director for anime, for Studio Ghibli. I believe the Studio Ghibli is no longer a thing. But he has a way of I sometimes worry about how I say things. I say he has a way, But it's not that he was doing it alone, right? He had a team behind it. But the movies, the anime movies that were produced under his direction, if that's a better way to put it, have something that it's hard for me to experience in other stories, which is when I watch one of Studio Ghibli movies, I didn't watch all of them. I didn't enjoy all of them. It's not categorical, but I am completely immersed in the story. I forget about the world I'm in. Like the world around me doesn't exist. I'm completely immersed in the story, and usually his stories have an aspect of magic, but it's never explained. But you go through the experience of viewing it, and it's like, oh, I see how that works, but there is never explanation of why it works or anything, and you're completely immersed in that world. And he's so detailed in the building of the story. I mean, the details of visual details, the creatures that exist in the world, or the technology that is used. It's so detailed that you just completely forget where you are. And it reminds me kind of a time when I was a kid, and just everything was magical and beautiful and just fascinating, and you're curious about everything. And I think the movies directed under him have that effect. And again, so just in the same way that Supergiant Game Studios kind of pushes me forward. I want to tell my stories. I want to be able to, make a short movie or whatever, make a small game. I want to be able to tell a story, hopefully that could be as good as theirs. I think I'll kind of very quickly, I kind of finish my thoughts for today's podcast, mostly on that, and I'll let you finish your thoughts on whatever you want to say.
No, I wanted to pick up on what you said about the Studio Ghibli. There are series that are like, there is an animated series, and there's the phrase that an image is worth 1,000 words. But animated series very rarely take advantage of that. It's everything's so frantic and so frenetic. Everything is happening so fast that it really just feels like a drawn movie than an actual animated series. But Studio Ghibli does have those moments where you spend time just observing the beauty of what they've drawn and what they envisioned and the world they created. And truly, there are scenes that are worth 1,000 words. The silence, the contemplation, the music, the mood, all that is so ingrained in a Studio Ghibli movie that it makes them, stand out for what they are. And it is rare to find movies like that. You have artistic old school movies of like the French studios, where you spend a lot of time just looking at an old man ponderously looking outside a window, and it's so deep, it's so full of meaning. Sure it is, but there is something magical in animation. The fact, the art style of someone drawing worlds that you can't even imagine. I love that so much. I watched, and again, going on the theme of me being contradictory, I watched Love, Death, Robots, which is a series of short stories, and each episode is a contained 5-10 minute story. And those 5-10 minutes are full of stuff happening. It's a short story. They really have to keep moving. They don't have a lot of time to let the imagery set in. But at the same time, Love, Death, Robots has amazing visuals. It has amazing storytelling through the visuals of what you're watching. And the short stories that are 5-10 minutes long feel like they could be the proof of concept for a whole movie, because the visuals are so strong. You immediately immerse yourself into that story. And it does have that Studio Ghibli magic, that Hayao Miyazaki, if that's how you pronounce his name, Hayao Miyazaki's magic, his vision of let the theme, let the atmosphere breathe and let it be part of the story you're telling. I could not recommend people enough to watch Love, Death, and Robots. It's a bit of a mouthful of a name, but the artistic direction of that series is goddamn amazing. It's so impressive. And watching that, I think if we said in past podcasts, but I watched that with my girlfriend, and each time we finished an episode, I kept looking at her and saying, I wish they made a series like Game of Thrones, but with the voice acting and the professionalism with the acting and professionalism of Game of Thrones, but with the artistic style of Studio Ghibli, or with the artistic style of Love, Death, and Robots, because fantasy is always kind of restricted to to special effects, or to animating a dragon on screen, or to the art direction of having to stitch the armor of thousands of people so that the battle scene looks realistic. In animation and in drawing, that stuff that besides being can be more spectacular, it's also slightly more cost efficient to do it. So you can really make spectacular sceneries that, Game of Thrones like shows invest a lot of money to replicate. Oh, and another example of that was a series that I watched recently called The Invincible, which is based on a book, and it's kind of a parody on superhero genres. And the main villain is a Superman-esque type character, and it has this very brutal, very violent story, but it's actually incredibly spectacular as well. And the animation is a bit janky, and I wish, because it has so much quality in voice acting, it has so much quality in storytelling, it has so much quality in style, but then the animation kind of faltered. It's very blocky, it's very choppy, and I wish from the bottom of my heart that they had the investment of Love, Death, and Robots, or the investment of a Game of Thrones, to make an animated series for 6 seasons, 8 episodes each, where for 40 minutes, where every single scene is just beauty for your eyes. Oh.
It's interesting you mentioned Love, Death, and Love, Death, and Robots.
I see, it's hard to say that shit.
Yeah, it's like a tongue twister. Love, Death, and Robots. I did watch, I think, 3 episodes, and I find it very interesting. And I think if I did tell stories, it would be something like that, but actually a little shorter, because I don't think I'm ready. That is still, you say 5 or 10, but from what I've seen, it's usually 10 or 15 minutes.
Oh yeah, probably, yeah.
And but they are completely independent stories, and they have different artistic style. And but I think it's a great way to tell short stories rather than having like a huge movie or a series. I actually disagree a little bit on that aspect. Like, I don't think Love, Death, and Robots should be exported to the multi-episode series. I think it's fine the way it is. I mean, the stories themselves. I mean,
there are stories there that obviously are meant just for a proof of concept, or it's like a demo. But also, the second season, I remember watching like 2 or 3 episodes that had so much lore in every single second that you could literally spend a whole series on that shit. There's I'm not going to spoil it, but there are episodes that obviously seems like it was the prologue of a series, and I was like, okay, ready for the next episode. But then it ends because it's just a short story. But yeah, there are also episodes that are just a comedy. It's just a slight gimmick. It's just all authors having fun, kind of like a Pixar short movies. Like Pixar did a lot of those back in the days before they. And also while they're doing like Toy Story and all that stuff. But between the movies, they also sometimes release snippets and short stories and like these proof of concepts that are very successful. And I think Inside Out started as a proof of concept. Like, they made a short video about emotions, and it was so well received that they translated that into a movie, Inside Out. And I could see Love, Death, and Robots. There are stories there that you could pick up and make a really interesting series or a movie. Of course, not all are winners.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I think a lot of in the showbiz, so to speak, in the movies and series, there are a lot of things like that. I can think. I don't remember the name of the movie, but I kind of looked into it. There was this lady director, and I think she made a short story in the beginning, and over the years it just became bigger and bigger until it became a movie. But she just did a short story, which was a proof of concept, and just evolved from there. So I can see that happening. I think it's normal. Just as you have books that are forgotten in time, and it has been what's the name of that famous horror writer. It's H.P.
Stephen King?
Lovecraft.
Or that.
H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, that guy was like a nobody. Nobody knew about him. Nobody cared about him. But then suddenly someone discovered him, and this is like, oh, this is awesome. And now you have all this shit going around. You have tons of games with his world. You have movies. You have TV show. I don't know. You have everything around it.
Yeah.
And he was a nobody. He made no money. And this is actually a common trend for writers. I'm sorry, Sev. I hope.
Oh no, for sure.
The world is different today.
No, I'm gonna die poor and alone.
No, but the bright side is that in 50 years someone will discover your book. No, 50 years you'll still be alive. Let's put 100. In 100 years someone will discover your book. It's like, oh, this is the best fantasy storytelling of Europe.
Yeah,
the best
day,
European story.
One day
European storyteller.
I'll be buried with my book, and a grave robber will desecrate my tomb, piss on my grave, and but this book though.
Hey, that would make for a good short story, don't you think?
Gotta find the subject.
Well, you're just a projected subject, it's not happened.
Yeah, but H.P. Lovecraft is not doing a tangent for too long. He was also a bit of a weirdo. Like his books were a lot of his description of monster and horror was, and suddenly a monster appeared, and it was a monster like one you can't even imagine.
Oh, okay. I never read any of his stuff. I watched one of his movies about this because I thought, it's H.P. Lovecraft, must be good, and I thought it was one of the shittiest movies I ever watched. Okay, this was, what's his name? I don't know. It's with Nicolas Cage. It's like such garbage. I don't know. Dude, don't watch that movie with Nicolas Cage about in the H.P. Lovecraft world. I don't know if it was the storytelling or whatever. I don't know much about his world, about his lore. The games look very interesting. I never actually got to play any of the board games in that world, but that movie was garbage. Don't watch it. That was like one of the worst movies I've seen in a while. I just pushed myself to watch it till the end because I thought, it's probably going to be good. It wasn't.
You good. Fool.
Yeah, it wasn't good at all. So what you're saying makes sense. He probably was a weird writer, and perhaps it's not for everyone. His storytelling.
I'm gonna, for in 30 seconds, the Lord of the Rings kind of went through a similar phase where in the books it was seen as this high fantasy, weird armor, weird magical world, and people didn't really believe in it much. It took the stylings of Peter Jackson to make the book cool that suddenly the Lord of the Rings aesthetic became prevalent, and suddenly the like you can imagine elf armor, you can imagine those capes of the hobbits, you can imagine that little leaf that they tie the cape around, you can imagine the ring, the Sauron, the orcs, is all very specific style that came from the artists of the movies and not so much from the depictions of the book, to the chagrin of many book lovers. And I feel like Game of Thrones went through a similar phase where someone just looked at the book and said, okay, that's corny because it was written in the 80s. Let's modernize it. And I'm fascinated with that idea because I think H.P. Lovecraft is a huge benefactor of that, where the book it's whatever. It's a decent book, I'm sure, but someone picked that up and made monsters that became iconic within the lore. But it wasn't H.P. Lovecraft's vision. It was someone else who gave the aesthetic. And that kind of transpired to, like you said, video games, to movies, to series, to other books. H.P. Lovecraft vision is so prevalent nowadays that I'm a proponent. I love it deeply.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you mentioned that it required someone else to like that and then give it a different spin.
Yeah.
Or I'd like to be the driving force behind that for a tiny book I read. It's I believe it's called The Crystal Saga: Children of War. I was actually trying to find. I was trying to look through the book and wonder if I could perhaps do like a voice recording of a short dialogue that would be self-contained without spoiling anything. But yeah, I haven't been able to find anything like that very quickly. But yeah, I was wondering if it would be possible to do like a short, just dialogue, introductions. Yeah, just a very short. I don't know, like 3 minutes. When I say very short, like really short, like 2-3 minutes of something.
Would you
maybe
also act the voices?
So ideally, it would be people with different voices, right? I'd like to voice out one of the characters, because actually I wanted to try voice acting before, so it would be interesting for me.
By the way,
and
this
perhaps
Crystal Saga thing, for transparency's sake, it's a book I wrote.
if you haven't listened to our previous podcasts, you should, because this should be in your knowledge now.
Yeah.
But truly, I do think. I mean, as mentioned before, if you haven't listened to any of our podcasts, we kind of got together to do this podcast because of the book, in a way. So, yeah, man, I think it's interesting. It's good
motivation. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of self-sacrifice on Sev's part, both monetarily, financially, and
emotionally.
Yeah. So, but and by Sev's standard, it was not success, and by his standard, it was not financially successful.
Yeah. But it's not enough for me to give up my day job and just dedicate a life of writing. That would be success to me.
Yeah, but from our conversation today, I think it's kind of obvious that these things, books that are famous, unfortunately lack exposition and visibility. So that's the missing factor. It's not the problem is not the story or the book. It's just there's a lot of fish in this sea, and just anyone who goes fishing just catches whatever bites their lure. And there's just too many books, too many stories to tell. So what makes this special? And usually it's someone else adapting it to a different medium and it being more mainstream. And I think, it has the potential, like any other tiny fish in the ocean, to grow into a big shark and devour the world.
Then you asked not to go too deep into the lore of the book, because most people haven't read it. But what characters would you actually be interested in voicing? This is for my own personal ego.
Oh, can we leave it for another podcast?
Okay.
I need to think, because I actually haven't read the book. I mean, I've read the book.
You haven't read the
quite
book?
A while ago.
I knew it.
I have. I read the book quite a while ago, almost a year now. So, and I'm not very fresh on names specifically. I'm not good with remembering names. I can visualize characters in my mind, also from the art you made and from my own imagination. But I would have to look back and think like, which dialogues would be really cool. I think like just right now, sprouting to my mind, I really like but dude, I don't know the name of the character. It's the dude that comes to Gyrus and tells him like, oh, you have to do this and you have to do that and all that, without spoiling and without giving too much out. Does that make sense to you?
You have to do this to Gyrus.
Yeah. He comes.
The messenger.
I don't. Yeah, the messenger. Yeah.
Huh.
Burr? Is it Burr or something?
Yeah, the Burr messenger. He doesn't. You don't remember his name because I never gave one.
Okay, there we go. No, but I'm terrible with names and like the species names and stuff. So I like when I said Burr, I'm like, is that right? Because that's Bill Burr. Is that correct?
Yeah, Bill Burr. I wrote Bill Burr in the story, and he gives directions to a dictator.
Yeah, but I think that's an interesting character.
Accent.
I think he doesn't speak much, but there is as you mentioned today, of negative space. There's a lot of things not being said, and it's not very clear at all in this case. I don't think it's.
I just found it interesting that you chose a character that has almost a speech impediment.
Yeah. But I think
very broken dialect.
But I think the interactions are interesting. There is a very good show of power and who's in control. I think that's an interesting interaction that you can sense from the interactions they have. It's very fascinating, I think. But you need the context of the characters, otherwise the dialogue isn't interesting at all. So perhaps thinking again, that wouldn't be a good thing to make a short video because you don't have the context.
So should I go into the conclusion?
Let's do this.
All right. Do not read lol Sev.
What a dick.
I've been preparing this for like the last 10 minutes. As soon as you wrote, do not read Sev, I immediately knew what I had to do.
You're one of those people, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. You zig and I zag. We have a few topics planned out already, but be sure to follow and subscribe so as to not miss anything. But on the topic of what we already said, can you relate to any of our inspirations? What has inspired you recently?
Let us know in the comments. We'll continue to release one or so podcasts a month. You can find us, as always, on YouTube and Spotify. And we're still waiting to know if there's any other platform you'd like to see us in. Remember to check the description for links and such, and subscribe so you don't miss our next episodes. I am Jay.
And I'm Sev.
Artistry Podcast.
Signing off.